ESPN 94.1 FM and AM 930 present The Drive.
It is Tuesday, December 2nd. Your drive begins now on ESPN 94.1 and AM 930. I'm your host, Paul Swann. Our text line this hour is brought to you by Clark's Pump and Shop. We do that every day at 304-396-TALK. 304-396-8255. We've got a lot to get into today. Some scheduling news from the Thundering Herd. Of course, it's not exactly the scheduling news we thought we would get. Yesterday, if you were with me on the show, I found out that Eastern Michigan is going to drop Marshall from the football schedule. And so there's a lot of reaction going on yesterday and today, and we're going to get into all of that in just a few minutes about that potential replacement game. So I was given the heads up, hey, there might be a schedule announcement tomorrow. This isn't the schedule announcement I was expecting. Marshall making the announcement earlier this morning that the Thundering Herd will travel to Bryant-Denny Stadium to face off against the University of Alabama. It's going to be a September 4th, 2027 matchup. First time that these two teams have ever met. Surprisingly, because Nick Saban, with his connection to the state of West Virginia, I would have thought a Marshall matchup at least once while Nick was there would have happened. So, release comes out earlier today. Also, there's a little history behind this. If you're not that familiar with the story, we recently learned more about it. There is a tie with Tuscaloosa, Alabama. They're called the Marshall Four. And the reason they're called the Marshall Four, it's a reference to the first black athletes from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, to attend Marshall University. These were the first on athletic scholarship. And so, unfortunately, those four individuals perished in the 1970 Marshall plane crash. Joe Hood, Larry Sanders, Robert Van Horn, and Freddie Wilson. So those individuals tragically were on that plane as well as the rest of the 75. And there was a statue unveiled for the Marshall Four. It's right outside of Benjamin Barnes YMCA facility in West Tuscaloosa. And these young men from Druid High School, great work by Keith Morehouse, WSAZ. I know he made the trip down to cover the story. And we now know more about the Marshall Four. So there is an interesting connection between Marshall and Tuscaloosa. And so I don't know what connection that's going to bring to this football game. That's at least, that's somewhere off in the future. But we now have this game. Still looking for a replacement game against an opponent to be named to fill the upcoming void in the 2026 schedule as Eastern Michigan is dropping the Thundering Herd. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of a tumbling, little domino effect. Heck, FBS Schedules on X even retweeted me from yesterday and said, watch the dominoes fall. That was interesting. Also, I'm getting some information from our text line, 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. I appreciate the texter. Yes, thanks for the reminder. Former athletic director Sean Lyons, who is a Parkersburg, West Virginia native, is back at Alabama, very high up in their athletic department. We appreciate the texter for sending that to me to remind me. And, of course, you can drop in as well, 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. So we're going to get your reaction to this game. What do you think? Do you love the game? Get a chance to go down to Alabama, see the Herd take on, well, one of the college powerhouses over the last 20 years or so at least, just a traditional power, or would you have liked seeing something else on the schedule? Texture says, Paul, bad to mid-tier power schools are paying around $1 million to $1.3 million per bye game. Why not schedule 2 of those where we have a better chance to win and clear more money than one body bag game against the Blue Blood? Our scheduling strategy drives me crazy. Appreciate the text. So early reaction is, why take a game like this that's not winnable when you could take a game or two, make solid money, and have a real shot at winning? Your thoughts? 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. And if you look at Alabama's scheduling, it's moving its game with USF from next year to 2032. And so Alabama adding Marshall for 2027, but adding Chattanooga and ECU on the 2026 schedule. So some interesting scheduling changes are afoot in the college football landscape. So we're going to get your reaction to all of this. And again, you can find me on X at Paul Swann, and you can also text at 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. Bill on X says, bring on Bama. Patrick says, Bama for EMU? I did not see that coming. Well, it's not exactly. Maybe there's a domino here or two for that, but it's not you're replacing EMU with Alabama. If it was 2026, I could claim that. Jackson says, I somehow bet USF Marshall schedule each other. I looked at the schedule. Unless some things get moved around, the dates don't match up. I could possibly be wrong. Here's an interesting one. This is from Zach. Zach says, in regards to the Eastern Michigan news, oh my God, they've ruined college football. And then FBSschedules.com reposted me, says, domino effect incoming. Scott, he, in reaction to the Alabama news, said, good gosh, why? With the facepalm emoji. And, of course, we got green hearts from Rocky. And here's one. The Knees says, interesting. If true, this is in relation to the Eastern Michigan game. If true, it will be interesting to see who's added. Also from X, poster says, I would rather sell naming rights of our stadium than start the season with beatdowns that leave us wondering who our starters are. So some interesting reaction already to the Eastern Michigan news and, of course, the addition of Alabama in 2027. We'll get more of that. 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. That is our text line. On X, you can find me at Paul Swann. More coming up on today's edition of The Drive, ESPN 94.1 and AM 930.
You're listening to The Drive with Paul Swann on ESPN 94.1 and AM 930.
We continue on with this Tuesday edition of Your Drive here on ESPN 94.1 and AM 930. Our text line, 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. Let's go back to the text line. Texter says, Paul, as of note, we now go on the road the first 2 weeks of the season in 2027 at Bama and at Ohio before coming home to Boise State. Not doing Gibby any favors there. Appreciate the text. Yeah, that does make it difficult, doesn't it? And of course, you take a game like Alabama for one simple reason: the money. That's a money game. It is simple. No other reason than we need a money game. Alabama is paying. Here comes the herd. Texture says, was this Alabama game recently scheduled? If not, is this a Coach Huff connection? No, this was announced today, if you didn't catch the news earlier. So I don't think this is a Coach Huff connection. I think there is some other connections involved. But at the end of the day, Alabama is making some scheduling moves, moved UCF off its 2026 schedule to 2032, adding Chattanooga and ECU as home games in 2026, adding the Thundering Herd as a home game in 2027. With the college football playoff valuing maybe wins more than anything these days, it seems, you're trying to rack up some wins. So Alabama will probably beat Chattanooga next year at home, will probably beat ECU. And we don't know what the Herd's going to look like in 2027. Maybe Marshall goes in there and pulls up the upset of a lifetime. At the same time, maybe Alabama's thinking, this will be a good opponent. This will be a good enough opponent. It might show up and give the Crimson Tide a fight, and then Alabama will dispatch Marshall, get its win, go on with the rest of its schedule. 304-396-TALK is the text line. 304-396-8255 to be a part of today's show. Also, you can find me on X at Paul Swann. So I don't know if that's going to have an impact on how a school like Marshall is going to have to plot long term. How will Marshall schedule if we've already seen sort of a glimpse of what we're looking at here? I mean, the Thundering Herd has gone into some tough places, went into Georgia. That's a tough place to go into. You look at the schedule next year, it's at Penn State, it's at Middle Tennessee, it's at Missouri State. So at Penn State, Middle Tennessee at home, at Missouri State. So looking for that 2026 game after 2027, as the texter pointed out, at Alabama, at Ohio, and then it's Boise State and then Bowling Green. Those are home games in 2027. I mean, we look out to 2028. Will this even be the schedule in 2028? At Wisconsin, Ohio, Central Connecticut, and at Eastern Michigan if that game remains. There's no word yet if that game is changing as well. Because, again, there could be some shifting based off of some dominoes that are falling and going in different directions. I mean, all I know is in 2030, Austin Peay is going to be the opponent for the Thundering Herd on September 14th. And in 2029, the Herd's going to be at Ohio on September 8th. That's it. We have plenty of openings here to see what happens. You try to schedule these things as far out as you possibly can, trying to build a schedule at the same time. The way things are changing with the scheduling philosophies, playing more conference opponents now or trying to stack wins. You're seeing the power schools go after more of the buy game, buy a win. Not saying that Marshall's a win automatic for Alabama, but it's a home game for Alabama. It's a paycheck for the Thundering Herd. So 304-396-TALK is the text line, 304-396-8255. On X, you can find me at Paul Swann. And if you look at Alabama's schedule, here's what they're doing in 2026. They're doing East Carolina, Florida State, and then Chattanooga. We don't have the time on that one yet. 2027, Marshall, and then at Ohio State. So Marshall is the warm-up to Ohio State. And then Ohio State in 2028. And then UT Martin and at Oklahoma State. So just kind of give you a glimpse of what Alabama's future non-conference schedule looks like. Let's go back to the text line, 304-396-TALK. Texter says, Alabama might have been interesting with an established Herd team. This year's Herd was patchwork, to say the least, with Coach Gibson almost starting from scratch, reload in the spring, and who knows what he'll have to replace beyond the graduating seniors. There's just too much discontinuity inherent in the sport right now. Appreciate the thoughts. And with the transfer portal, 2026 could be a tremendous year for the Thundering Herd, and then you might have to start right back over in 2027. You might feel like, okay, I've showcased myself. We got it done in 2026. Go Herd, we got you a championship. Okay, I'm out. We'll see you. I'm going to go somewhere else. Similar to what happened. You had a lot of established players at Marshall under Coach Huff, and then Coach Huff sees the writing on the wall, leaves for Southern Miss, and then conveniently, a lot of players leave for Southern Miss. Not all of them, but a lot, some key pieces of Marshall's team leave. And, of course, You know how these coaching changes work. Coach Huff was out of Huntington before he even finished coaching the championship game in the Sun Belt title game. He was out. He was out before the title game even finished, and before he was even done holding that trophy, he was already bound for Southern Miss. And we've seen too many comments where the players indicated, yeah, we knew what was up. So that's where we're at in college football now. It's terrible. I believe to this day that if coaches were locked in and players were locked in a little bit better, we could at least organize this. The beginning of the restrictions on the transfer portal is a start. But you got to do this for the coaches as well. There's got to be some continuity here. Now, some might argue, hey, you know what? This is free market. This is free market right here. You have something we want, we can pay for it. We'll pay the buyout. We got our guy. We don't care about your program. We're only concerned about ours. I mean, look at Kentucky. Kentucky making changes and getting its guy. And we already knew that they had someone in place. I don't think Kentucky pulled the trigger without a coach in mind. So Stoops is out. And all of a sudden, there's speculation. Who's it going to be? Is it going to be Will Stein? Yes, it's Will Stein. So Mark Stoops is gone. Less than 24 hours later, Will Stein, who is a Kentucky native, he was named the head coach late Monday night. Offensive coordinator of a high-powered offense at the University of Oregon. And, of course, he does have connections to Kentucky. And I shook my head at this one. I was talking to our news director, Bill Cornwell, today, who is a devout UK fan. He bleeds almost as much UK blue than he does green. I don't know how the colors mix, but Stein grew up a Kentucky fan, but he played at the University of Louisville. His father's Matt Stein, he was a defensive end at Kentucky. And there's that connection there. So you got a guy that played at Louisville is going to be coaching Kentucky. Stranger things have happened. But this was already in the bag. You know that you just don't fire your coach, let him go, and then less than 24 hours later, oh, hey, we've got our new coach. You had your new coach all along, and you made the decision to pull the trigger. Now, I wish him luck, but at the same time, it's Kentucky. You can have positive success at Kentucky, but does Kentucky invest enough in football to compete with the likes of Alabama? This isn't basketball we're talking about. This is football, which is a secondary sport in the Bluegrass State, at least in Lexington, even though there is a desire to compete with the likes of Alabama. It's basketball first, basketball second, football third, maybe. 304-396-TALK is the text line, 304-396-8255. That is the number to be a part of today's show, brought to you by Clark's Pump and Shop. You can find me on X at Paul Swann. More coming up on this edition of The Drive, ESPN 94.1 and AM 930.
This is The Drive on ESPN 94.1 and AM 930. Follow at Paul Swann on X for Marshall sports updates and more.
We continue with your Tuesday, December 2nd edition of The Drive on ESPN 94.1 and AM 930. Our text line, 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. With all this talk of football, don't forget, we've got basketball action coming up tomorrow. The Thundering Herd on the road, taking on UNCW in Wilmington, North Carolina. 6 o'clock is our airtime. 6:30, Steve Cotton will take you the rest of the way, and then we'll tip things off at 7 o'clock. The Herd fell to Lipscomb Wednesday night at the Cam Henderson Center. But there's some positives still going on for the Thundering Herd right now. Marshall does lead the Sun Belt Conference in assists per game right now at 18.1. And Thundering Herd still the best in the Sun Belt at 11.1 three-pointers per contest. And we're looking at a team in UNCW 7-0 at home, out-rebounding teams by a 12.1 margin and holding opponents to 38.5% from the field. Those are just some of the notes that we've got for this game. And I expect a more spirited contest. Only because I don't think that game against Lipscomb set too well with Coach Jackson. Even at this point, I know you got to move on, you got to move forward, you got to learn from that. You know, Doc Holliday would always say, I didn't learn anything from a loss. And I think that's false. But at the same time, you look at this game and you can't overlook UNCW. This isn't Lipscomb. You don't overlook Lipscomb. Even though there is that, okay, look at their record, they're not as good, you know, we should have them, you know, we're doing well. You don't overlook a team like Lipscomb because it can sneak up on you. That's well and good in hindsight, but you just don't overlook them. Now, you overlook UNCW at your own peril. So we'll have that game for you. It's going to be on Flow Sports. So if you can't watch it on Flow Sports, which most of you probably can't, you can listen to it. We've got you covered. 6 o'clock is going to be our airtime right here on ESPN 94.1 and AM 930. Text line 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. Texture says, Paul, do you think that Marshall will see more of these money games now that the power schools are changing scheduling philosophy? I'd say yes. Appreciate the text. You look at Alabama's schedule, and Alabama's the perfect example. Alabama's got to play a power non-conference opponent. Those the rules. Ohio State in 2028. Ohio State in 2027. Florida State in 2026. Notre Dame, Oklahoma State in 2029. 2030, it's Georgia Tech, Notre Dame. You're going to have to play power opponents, at least one. That's what the SEC wants. And so you had to kind of make some things happen with your schedule to accommodate all that. And so USF gets moved. Thundering Herd gets added to the 2027 schedule. It's a one-off. I don't think that we're going to see the Herd back on the schedule anytime soon. But again, it's a one-off. And right now, Marshall's got some slots in 29 and 30. 28, it's at Wisconsin. So unless the Eastern Michigan game in 2028 also gets taken off the schedule, Marshall's booked up until 2029, so we could probably see some power schools starting to call the Thundering Herd and saying, look, you know, we gotta get a schedule put together. We need a home game. Hey, this is what we're paying. Are you in? And I would think a school at Marshall's financial level says yes. Absolutely, we're in. Penn State's a money game. Georgia's a money game. Alabama's a money game. Wisconsin is a money game. Look for more money games, I think, in the near future with this schedule. Is it great to start the season 0-1? Well, no. Is it good to get a paycheck and to help fund things? Yeah. But at what cost? Absolutely, at what cost does a money game like Alabama at Wisconsin, at Penn State, what's that do for the program long term? Does it help financially long term so you can maybe get to the point where teams are a little leery to schedule you because you're pretty good? After all, the Sun Belt's not the premier G6 league. And so you might see a lot of Sun Belt schools on more power schedules because it's a good enough game. Not really a threat. It's not like scheduling an American team right now. If you're looking for a money game and you're a school in the American, you might have a harder time because you probably are more of a threat to a power than, say, a Sun Belt team right now. And so that's where the Sun Belt is. It's got to, across the board, beef up this conference to be the best of the rest, as I like to call it. Remember when Conference USA was in the crossroads phase of its, will they stay, will they go? Which schools will it add? Will Marshall stay? And the thought was, why not be the best of the rest? You're not the power leagues, but why not be the best? And you've got a couple of leagues that are ahead of the Sun Belt right now in some regard. Basketball is really far behind some of the other leagues. Football, East Division was considered to be the best division in then the G5, now the G6. I don't know if that still holds. 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255 is our text line to be a part of today's show here on ESPN 94.1 and AM 930. Also on X, you can find me at Paul Swann. More coming up on this edition of The Drive.
This is The Drive on ESPN 94.1 and AM 930. Miss an episode? Catch it anytime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We continue on with this edition of Your Drive. It is Tuesday, December 2nd. Our text line, it's brought to you by Clark's Pump and Shop at 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. You can find me on X at Paul Swann. I was reading this during the break. Dennis Dodd reposted something from Brett McMurphy. That's how I caught it. Just keep this in mind. Scheduling is going to fall apart, at least for the schools at the G6 level, because in 2026, every Power 4 school, this is according to Brett McMurphy, every Power 4 team will play 10 Power Conference opponents except the Big Ten's Indiana, Nebraska, Penn State, Rutgers, and Washington. Wouldn't you like to get on that Indiana schedule? They like playing an easy schedule. That's a school Marshall maybe could sneak up on. Maybe. I'm just interested to see what the schedule is going to look like here over the next few weeks and months, because I don't think that anything we've got right now is solid. I don't see, looking at the Marshall schedule, there's not going to be a change. Penn State is the game. In 2026, Penn State on the road. I don't see Marshall losing Middle Tennessee, as much as I'd be happy to see Marshall lose Middle Tennessee. Middle Tennessee's got Murray State, Nevada, at Marshall, at Kansas. I'd be okay with losing Middle Tennessee. I'm good with Missouri State, to be honest with you. I'm fine with that as an opponent. Missouri State's got Texas A&M on the road in 2026. And at SMU, and then the two home games in between, Lindenwood and Marshall. Those are the games. They've got an interesting schedule, just kind of since I'm looking at it. They're going to be at Cincinnati in 2027. They're going to be at Arkansas State in 2028. Makes sense in 2029. They're going to be at Missouri, Texas Tech. They're going to be at Tulsa and Wisconsin in 2030. Those make sense. At Missouri in 2033, 2032 at Tulsa. So they've got an interesting schedule going on there. But for the Thundering Herd, I don't see any changes other than the Eastern Michigan game in 2028. Central Connecticut's not going anywhere. Ohio's not going anywhere. I don't think you lose Boise State off this schedule. You keep them right where they are at. And then Bowling Green, it's at home. It's in Huntington. So I'm not as worried about that game as I would be if it was on the road. And if Woody Woodrum was here, bless his soul, if he was here with us today, he would tell you, be concerned about Bowling Green. So while we've got a moment, let's get your text, 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. Texture says, why can't we get Kentucky on the schedule? I appreciate the text. We got something like that similar yesterday. Someone asking, why can't we get Kentucky on the schedule? I think the answer is that it maybe doesn't make sense for Kentucky, but we could see the schedules change here in the next few years. Maybe Kentucky starts shifting things around. After all, Kentucky just hired a new coach. I don't know what the scheduling philosophy is going to be here in the future, but here's Kentucky's schedule. 2026, Youngstown State, South Alabama, and Louisville. Louisville, of course, is going to be on that schedule. That's just not going anywhere. But in 2027, Toledo, Murray State, Ball State, and at Louisville. 2028, at Toledo. So Kentucky will travel. Get that out of your mind right now. No excuses. Kentucky will travel. Kent State, Eastern Illinois, and Louisville. And just looking further ahead, Georgia Southern, Eastern Kentucky, and at Louisville in 2029, and then Louisville and Kent State in 2030. So there could be some openings here down the road for a Marshall-Kentucky matchup. One, there would be a huge influx of Kelly Green in Lexington that day. Huge. If you're looking for a game where the fans travel, Marshall fans would travel. Some of you actually accuse Marshall fans of being secondary Kentucky fans. You know who you are. But that would make perfect sense for the schedule, but philosophy-wise, is there value for Kentucky to play Marshall? I say yes. I'm probably a little biased. Kentucky, maybe people associated with the program say, not really much to gain. It's not really giving us anything as far as recruiting. Travel would be great for their fans. What do we get from that game? 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. Texture says, Paul, Marshall has a chance to do the funniest thing ever. Let's go Mountaineers. Thank you for the text. Not going to happen. I'm just going to go ahead and say it right now. Unless some strange voodoo happens, that is not, don't even put it in your mind. That is not happening. I could completely be wrong, but I'm willing to go out on a limb and say, no, that is not happening. West Virginia and Marshall in football cannot get along, agree on anything. And besides, the 2026 schedule looks booked up. Coastal, UT Martin, Virginia and Charlotte, 27, Southern Miss. Coach Huff will find out all about Morgantown in 2027 if Coach Huff is there. VMI, Ohio, 2028. Tennessee and Charlotte, Youngstown State. Youngstown State seems to get around. And Akron. That's your Mountaineer schedule in 2028. Youngstown State and Akron. 2029, Ohio, that makes sense. Pitt, obviously makes sense. Robert Morris. And then 2030, Rhode Island, Pitt, and Akron. I could go on. The one constant here is that Pitt makes the most sense. VMI is in 2031, playing Virginia and Charlotte in 2032. So, is there room for Marshall on this schedule? Maybe not in the short term. I don't even entertain it. But I will address the text. Appreciate the text as well. 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. What about Louisville? Texter says, Marshall's played Louisville before. I wouldn't be opposed to it. It's a game in which Marshall has found some success. And it's an easier drive than some of the opponents that Marshall's played in the past. So could Marshall and Louisville happen here in the near future? And would it be better to have a game like Louisville over a game like Alabama? Some of you have said, yes, you'd rather see a different game than Alabama. Some of you are all into it as well. So I think right now it's pretty mixed from the reaction I'm getting. Keep those coming. 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. That's the number to be a part of the show here on ESPN 94.1 and AM 930. Speaking of WVU, or at least former WVU coaches, it appears that Neil Brown and North Texas are going to be finalizing a deal. He's going to be the next coach of North Texas. And that seems to be a better fit for him, I think, than WVU was. I don't think he was ready for WVU. I like Neil Brown, so hopefully he'll do well. More text, 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255, and on X at Paul Swann. Texter says, a program like Marshall has to take games like Alabama. It's the only way in the long term to help fund the program at this level. And you might get lucky and knock one off now and then. All right, appreciate the thoughts. Hey, that's a positive attitude. You might. What if Marshall beat Alabama? What if Marshall goes in, beats Alabama, and then all of a sudden the football world's talking about the Thundering Herd, at least for 1 week? It's the same thing that happened when Marshall beat Notre Dame. The football world was talking about Marshall, and then Bowling Green happened. That was the worst follow-up to probably the most important win outside of the national championships in Marshall football history. How would you rank them? 1992, always number one in my heart. To be fair, I would say, to be honest, to be intellectually honest, the win against Xavier probably deserves that spot. Young Thundering Herd. So I would concede any arguments, and I would concede that point before you make it. On further inspection, the Xavier game, the Young Thundering Herd, probably the most important win in Marshall football history. I would put the 1992 championship right behind that. I think I would slot the 96 title game in there as well. Maybe it's a personal 3 for me. But then I've got Notre Dame at least up there. 4, maybe a 5. I'm trying to think what tops that game. So that's a homework assignment for you. You tell me what those rankings really should be at 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. Hey, and don't forget, if you're listening to the show on the podcast, I want to invite you to follow me on X. You can find me there. And then if you hear something on the show, you want to comment, you want me to address it either on the show, or maybe I can address it on social media on the timeline, at Paul Swann on X. And that's where I'm primarily at social media-wise. So you can find me there, and I'll happily respond to all of your posts if I can. There's some things that I can't really comment on at the time, but if there's something I can talk about maybe on the show, and you're listening to the podcast instead of listening live, that's a great way for you to be a part of the show and still feel like that you're part of the community. So you can find me there again on X at Paul Swann. And I'm always checking it. Not as much as I used to. I don't live with the phone in my hand anymore. Let me tell you. Scheduling your notifications sometimes. I mean, still, you got to look out for certain things here and there. But honestly, scheduling your notifications now and then is the good thing to do, just as a public service announcement. All right, let's get back to the text line, 304-396-TALK, 304-396-8255. Texter says, good call on Xavier being the most important win in Marshall football history. I think that it probably should be, because it's not the opponent, it's not what it did for you in the records, it's not a championship, it's this program is going to be okay. This community is going to be okay. Not fully ever healed, at least some, from the scars of the plane crash. I mean, for those that come after You have a different perspective, a different journey in this story. For those that lived it, for those that still live it, I think the Xavier game was okay. We can move on. We can remember what those people mean to us. We'll always remember what those people mean to us. And we can go on. And it's going to be okay. I mean, as cheesy as some of the lines in the movie was, winning's the only thing that matters. I don't think that was disrespectful. It's like, hey, you know what? We're at that point now where, we're playing football and we're living sort of I don't want to say a normal life, but cheesy as that movie can be at times, We Are Marshall, there definitely is there's some thoughts there. All right, I've got a couple of really interesting texts I want to get to before we hit the break, and we're almost out of time. So I'll get them in the last 20 seconds. The Xavier game signal, we're back. The 92 game, we've arrived. Also, Xavier, 92, 96, Notre Dame, Kansas State. Those are good choices. Thanks for the text. I'll be back with you tomorrow here, ESPN 94.1 and AM 930.
WRBC Huntington, W227BS Huntington, your flagship home of the Marshall Thundering Herd and The Drive with Paul Swann, ESPN 94.1 FM and AM 930.